Let's have fun. Hello from Portland, Oregon. I'm Aki Nakanishi, Anish Unit Curator of Culture, Art and Education at the Japan Institute of Portland Japanese Garden. I know it was a mouthful, but wherever you might be joining us from today, it's a tremendous pleasure to be hosting this webinar series, Living Traditions, through a partnership with our revered friends on the East Coast, Japan Society. And I'm truly honored to say that this coast-to-coast historic partnership is facilitated by the Prime Minister's Office of Japan in order to get really the best of Japanese cultural programming across the world. In case you are new to this online series, though, it seeks to unravel the historical journeys of some of the most iconic facets of Japanese culture through conversations between thought-provoking experts and cultural stewards on how they maintain deep-rooted traditions in the present day. And today, how exciting it is that we are talking about environment, architecture, and landscape architecture. Deeply rooted in the ethos of Japanese landscape design for 60 years, at Japan Institute, we believe firmly in living in harmony with nature, and always strive to think how art and culture can inform and influence the way we interact with nature. So today's topic, sustainability, as casual as it might have sounded in the program title, is very much at the front and center of what it is that we are about, promoting human ingenuity based on the notion that we live at the whim of nature, not never the other way around. For today's theme, we couldn't think of a better panel and a moderator than who we have put together for you. And even though this topic is way too vast and rich to be unpacked in mere 60 minutes, I'm just quite sure we will be able to provide, this critical jumping off point for many other focused discussions going forward. So let me just get the ball rolling by introducing your moderator today. She is someone I deeply respect and I always learn from. Now, urban designer and landscape architect, active in many parts of the world, but based out of our beloved city of Portland, Oregon. Carol Keckett is one of the Pacific Northwest thought leaders who traverses many disciplines in urban development projects of countless different scales through her own landscape architecture firm called Place. So let's dive right in, shall we, Carol? The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Aki, for the warm welcome. It's always a deep and meaningful personal experience to engage with Japan Institute of Portland Japanese Garden. And the purpose of talking sustainability today is to provoke, to ponder, to explore, and to engage in what it means to inhabit our earth intellectually and respectfully. And if our built environment is a letter to the future, because it tells important stories of who we are and what we value, then what message are we sending? And how do we reimagine and recommit to sustainable living by revitalizing ancient traditions and combining them with the modern day? This is something that Japan Society has practiced for a long time, and iconic architects like Hiroshi Nakamura and Hiroshi Sambuichi are leading the way. And this important kind of way of living in harmony with the natural world. And so we are looking forward to presenters Asby Brown and Ken Naoshima to take us on a journey. So it's my distinct pleasure to invite Asby Brown to join us. A widely published author and authority on Japanese architecture and design environment, Asby's groundbreaking writings on traditional Japanese carpentry, compact housing, and sustainable practices of Japan are recognized having brought these topics to the Western designers and to general public. He founded the Future Design Institute, Kanazawa Institute of Technology, and currently serves of the sculpture faculty at Musashino Art University in Tokyo and the architecture faculty at Japan's Women's University. I am so excited for your talk, Asby, and to expand on our recent exchange. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Carol. It's a pleasure to be here and happy to have this session with my good friend, Ken. And yeah, I'll get right into my presentation. I'll take a moment to share the screen. I want to address a couple of important questions. Where do we come from? In other words, what sort of things have we inherited? What sort of practices have we inherited from the past that can help us move forward and help us understand where we're going and what we need to do to get there? We'll start by, pointing out some pressing global issues that many of us are aware of. At the top is climate change. There's deforestation in many parts of the world. We have lots of problems with fresh water supply and use in many parts of the world. We need to find better ways to provide energy. We have population pressures going on. We have lots of urbanization, pressures on the food supply, issues with waste, how to deal with it. And then a big question of what do we need in terms of information and timely feedback to understand where we are and what we need to do. I want to talk for a moment about a concept called circularity, the circular economy. I've learned that a lot of people are not quite familiar with this, but this is a series of practices and approaches that have been developed over the past few years, and it particularly emerged around 2010 to combine lots of important strands of thinking for sustainability. Our current economic and material production system is, we can characterize it as take, make, dispose. In other words, we take the resources, whether they are extractive or they're biological. We make the things we need to use, our cars, our sneakers, our phones. We use them and then we dispose of them. It's a kind of a one-way route from resource to landfill or incineration, and there is recycling going on, but certainly not enough. Circularity seeks to make a closed circle out of this. And of course, we collect resources. Some of these will be biological inputs. In fact, we would like to make more of them biological, forest, wood, agricultural things, textile fibers, etc., because these are inherently renewable. There will need to be non-renewable inputs, extraction, metals, other resources. We would like this process to be powered by renewable energy if possible. The manufacturing, the making part will continue. It will change because some of the materials will change and some of the other attitudes will change, but it's a very, very familiar process. Then the distribution phase. Often it's under-recognized how much of an effect this has on environment, on resources, on pollution, on energy. And then we use the stuff. Again, our sneakers, our cars, our phones, whatever it is. The key is what happens next. Recycling is a very familiar term. The term upcycle is now becoming very, very common. This refers to returning the materials in the things we use back to the top of this loop as resources as much as possible. And one key is to try to do this in ways that regenerate natural capital. For instance, if it is wood, we want to produce wood in a way that regenerates the forest. If it's coming from the ocean, we want to regenerate and preserve the ocean rather than see it degraded through this. And of course, there will be waste, but we want to minimize that to as little as possible. The next thing is that the system includes inner loops. So we're using things, we should reuse and repair them as much as possible. Redistribution. If you take your used clothes to the thrift shop, that is a kind of redistribution. We want to encourage that as much as possible. Reconditioning. Appliances and other things are being designed now that they can be easily taken apart. They're modular to be easily reconditioned and put back into the process of manufacturing. So this is circularity, and there's a lot of benefits to be had from this in terms of environment, carbon, waste, and everything else. And what I want to point out is that many of these things were anticipated by Japanese society of the Edo period. The core principles that we consider circular economic thinking now really were done in the Edo period of Japan in a very, very complete and effective way. So the Edo period began in the early 1600s. It lasted until 1868 when the country opened up to the West and began industrializing. So it's a little more than 250 years. And they had incredible pressures, almost all of the same problems that we're facing that I listed for deforestation, population, food, etc. They had the same problems, except perhaps for climate change, and they dealt with them very, very well. The problem was that prior to this period, there had been 2 centuries of war and incredible deforestation that was starting this sort of collapsing dominoes of landslides and problems with the watershed and problems with agriculture. And it was really on the brink of environmental collapse, but they managed to reverse that. And the first step was to gather and share information about the health of the environment. And a great example of that is that they did a nationwide tree census, which began in the middle of the 1600s. It took a decade or two, but they understood what was happening in the forest, which forests they needed to preserve and keep closed for cutting, which ones they could exploit for materials and other things. And this led to what we call regenerative forestry, which is a very important thing. And the forest health was prioritized throughout society. Throughout this process, citizens played an important role in monitoring their environment and using it ethically and restoratively. And this includes, of course, the forest, it includes agriculture, it includes the watershed, it includes all of that. And in terms of something like materials, which is what we're centering on in circularity, the Edo period showed us how to overcome these problems of one-way use, waste of energy for production and distribution, the risk of depleting the resources, and the high cost of disposal. And their goal was 100% utilization of materials and zero waste, which is the goal that we share in circularity. And a good example is what happened to a building when it was demolished in the Edo period. So buildings in Japan were built out of wood almost exclusively. They were jointed together. They were made to be disassembled. And this allowed maintenance, allowed them to be moved, and allowed them to be reused when they were demolished. So big things like beams and columns, there were markets that specialized in selling this kind of stuff, that used wood. Floorboards could be resurfaced and reused. Other components, bamboo, thin wooden slats had a reuse. Roofing tiles, of course, they have a very long life. They could be reused. People would come to the demolition site and buy all this stuff. The copper gutters, the metal things were particularly valuable because metal ores were a bit scarce and used a lot of energy, particularly sliding doors, the Fusuma sliding screens, the shoji, these things. They were modular. They were basically the same dimensions in the same town, and they could be instantly taken from the demolition site and put into a new house. The same thing for tatami mats and pretty much everything else. So this entire process is something that we would consider very, very circular. This brings us to the Kamikatsu Zero Waste Center in Tokushima by Hiroshi Nakamura architects, which was opened in 2020. And it is kind of remarkable in that it embodies many of these very important principles that we talked about from Edo and from circularity. The town of Kamikatsu back in 2003 established a principle that they would try to become a zero waste town. In other words, no waste. And this meant that they spent years learning how to recycle, how to minimize other aspects of waste, how to educate the community and get them on board. They had this done in other facilities, and then the Zero Waste Center sort of put a face on that. And it really is a remarkable building. To let you know exactly where this is the map of Japan, and Shikoku is the island in the west. It's one of the smaller islands, and the town of Kamikatsu is on the eastern edge of that in the prefecture of Tokushima. And it is a beautiful place. It's these steep, verdant Japanese mountain, steep valleys. This is the Zero Waste Center here. You can see it nestled into the mountains. There's this long road that runs parallel to the Katsura River in the town. And you can see that the Zero Waste Center is basically shaped kind of like a hook, but actually like a question mark. And this is sort of an inspired thing because this question of why has become the crucial sort of key point for the communication for the Zero Waste Center. And basically the layout, this is sort of orientated differently, but the recycling and the stockyards of the materials are in the curved part. And then there is a thrift shop called the Kurukuru Shop. There are a learning center, public hall, collaborative laboratory, and this hotel called Hotel Y. This is a beautiful photograph, and I want to say the architect's office provided these photographs. This is by Koji Fuji, remarkable photograph. I tried to take one like this myself. It's not nearly as good. This shows how it sweeps around, and it's a beautiful view framing the mountains. And what we see here on the right are sort of the recycling for smaller items, and it goes around to the left. It's bigger and bigger, the furniture and the appliances and stuff. And the structure.
Albi, do you mind sharing again? We just lost your link for a second. Thank you. You are so beautifully describing everything. We are on a journey with you. We want to join you, but we also would love to see the images too. So that would be amazing.
Yes. So how far did we get?
Just last couple of slides. Great.
Okay, so start from here. So yes, I was showing this. This is the basic layout with the recycling yards and the Kurokuru shop and the learning center, laboratory, and the hotel. And here is this beautiful photograph I was mentioning, where it sweeps around from the right all the way around to the left, from smaller scale things to larger scale things. Beautiful photograph by Koji Fuji. And I want to talk about the structure, because this is one of the more interesting and sustainable, and to me, Edo and circular aspects. They found a way to use lumber with minimizing the waste by basically splitting logs and then sandwiching between them logs that had been simply milled to be flat on two sides. And by simply, determining the length of these things, it allows them to sweep back to make room for trucks and other things to enter. And this was a very, very inspired solution. So on the left here, we have this log split in half. And then on the right, we have a log that's been simply milled to be flat on two sides. And this leads to boards of different sizes and lots of smaller components that can be recycled and used for fuel. One of the key points is the use of recycled doors and windows. It's a beautiful thing. They put out a call to the community to donate basically doors and windows that they don't need anymore. And this becomes sort of a visual language. And people can go to this place and see, oh, this was in my house, this was in my school, this used to be in the shop I go to. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing that involves the community. And one of the things I want to point out is that this has become kind of a broader language in the town. The Zero Waste Center was actually preceded by this brewery called Rise and Win, which was built in 2015, so 5 years before the Zero Waste Center. And it is, a very interesting building. On the left-hand side is where the pub is with this sloped roof. On the right-hand side is where the brewing goes on, and it uses these windows. And the owners were trying to find a way to help put a face on this zero waste recycling program. And they're the ones who started this idea and got the community to donate these things. You can see this beautiful chandelier made of recycled bottles. It's called the upcycled chandelier. On the right and left, you can see cabinetry that was actually old shelves and tansu chests that were also donated by the community. So this is really where a lot of this started. And in terms of recycling, I want to point out that it was very, very common in Edo. It was a key to the way they did things. There were over 1,000 recycling businesses in Edo. There were over 500 used clothing sellers. So the idea of, bringing your clothes to the thrift shop was actually something they did a lot then. So many things were recycled: clothes, paper, wood, metal, building materials, oil, shoji, barrels. And it was done society-wide on a commercial scale because people actually made money doing this. And here's a view of the recycling bins at the waste center. When people throw something away or bring it to be recycled, they learn, whether the town has to pay money to have that thing recycled or whether they make money. And people learn, and they got on board and they participate very, very well with this. The thrift shop, the Kurokuru shop, it's interesting because town residents can bring anything they don't need anymore, and anybody, including visitors, can pick them up and take them home without needing to pay. But you weigh them. You have to weigh them, and that is totaled up. And every month it's like 500 kilograms of waste that gets recycled in this way, upcycled. And you can see this also has this beautiful chandelier made from bottles. The last thing I want to point out is that all of this requires community effort and learning, and there are great precedents in Japan. There's something called yui, which is mutual assistance, and a great example is when roofs are rethatched. It's a community effort, and people are learning there. All generations can do it, men, women. There's something for kids to do. There's something for elderly people to do, and it's a process of learning, and the similar thing goes on, with the forest and with water and everything else. And at the Zero Waste Center, there's a small hotel. which is a place where people can come and stay, and they'll spend a few days in town, and they will learn how the recycling works. They will learn about what's going on in the town. It's kind of a remarkable and an inspired thing. The rooms, again, made from recycled materials. The furniture is recycled, and there's a beautiful oculus in the center. It's octagonal and oculus, and this is the eye of the dragon. There's a wonderful story about a painting of a dragon, and when the eye was painted, it came to life. So this is a poetic gesture and a very, very beautiful part of it. The last thing is that there's a lot of connected activity in Kamikatsu. There's a school, Kayabuki, a thatch roof school, teaching people about these practices, traditional practices. There's a wonderful organization called Ino, where I visited. These are the participants there. They were all very, very informed and enthusiastic. People can go there. It's particularly for overseas visitors. And just finally, to sum up how this works, basically it works because there's a shared purpose, this zero waste policy. It's absolutely rooted in the local environment, the local conditions, but people who are doing it have a global awareness. They know what the problems are globally, and they're trying to contribute to solutions. The architecture gives form to this, the principles, and it's an anchor for the community, which really makes it easier for all this connected activity, the schools, the learning, the teaching, organic farming, whatever it is. It makes it easy for that to happen. And my sense is that this is replicable. This similar thing can be done elsewhere. They've showed us how to do it, and I think we can and should see more and more of that. So to sum up, this is the ending. The circular economy model adheres so closely to Edo period environmental resource and design principles that Edo can serve as a prototype and inspiration, teaching us the many benefits of living in a highly developed circular economy. And the Kamikatsu Zero Waste Center draws on this traditional local knowledge and anchors other community activity sites to help show the way to a circular future. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Wow, thank you, Asbi. This is super informative and powerful ideas, all from Edo to Kamikatsu. And I think we're all lining up and want to go on a tour with you.
Everyone should. And you meet the people.
Yeah. You're an incredible ambassador for the circularity and the lessons in living green from traditional to modern Japan. And so to continue on this journey, I'm delighted to invite Dr. Ken Tadashi Oshima. He's professor of architecture at the University of Washington in Seattle, where he focuses on transnational architectural history, theory, and design. He's the author of numerous books, and his work on the international context of architecture and urbanism in Japan is published extensively. He received PhD in architecture history and theory from Columbia University and Master of Architecture from University of California in Berkeley. Dr. Oshima was a president of the Society of Architectural Historians and visiting professor at Harvard Graduate School of Design and UCLA. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you so much, Carol, and it's wonderful to join you as we a tour de force of lessons that I think will resonate in looking at the work of Hiroshi Sambuichi, and see this in this broader context, but actually focus on the area of the Inland Sea, Shikoku, and really talk about this theme of talking sustainability, ancient wisdom, modern practice. I really believe naturally flows to talk about the work and philosophy of architect Hiroshi Sambuichi, and his conception of visualizing wind, water, and sun. So actually, if we can start the slides, you'll see the resonance of the background, both in my background and in the images of this area. It's a very special region, the Setouchi, Inland Sea. And here we can, I think, really start to understand this notion of moving materials. So again, visualizing wind, water, and sun. For those of you who don't know Hiroshi Sambuichi, he is highly celebrated both in Japan and internationally, having won the prestigious Architectural Institute of Japan Prize twice, and the Murano Togo Prize for the work that we'll look at the end, the Naoshima Hall. But also in this international context, he won Denmark's prestigious Daylight Award for timeless fluid treatment of light, as we will see. And so it's in this context that we look to these fundamental principles. So next slide. We'll highlight this ancient wisdom, modern practice in looking at how he states, in an ideal architecture, if one looks at its form, the moving materials of the area or village, such as the wind, water, and sun, will become visible. For example, in the Itsukushima Shrine Precinct, the movement of the Seto Inland Sea, between low tide and high tide may be sensed. This is the challenge for me as an architect. So, as simple as this might sound, it is really, I believe, as we'll see, fundamental to sustaining architecture. And one that led to the proclamation that he is the foremost green architect of, or at least one of the foremost green architects of our time, by the Louisiana Channel, the web TV channel, based in the Louisiana Museum of Modern Art in Denmark, for which we will get a presentation. It's actually in this context in 2017 that he did an installation, the Cistern Pavilion, entitled The Water, that's in Copenhagen. So if we can go to the next slide, we will get Sambuichi-san's own voice and character.
私が建築をやるときに、最も考えているのはその場所の美しさとか、そこにある太陽、水、空気、そういったもの全体でその場所が私の建築ができることによって美しく見えること、その良さが引き出されること、そこに一番興味があります。だから長い時間をかけてその場所の私が言う動く素材、水とか空気とかそういったものを調べてリサーチして、そういったことから始まっていきます。まずその場所を知るためには1年間春、夏、秋、冬それぞれ動く素材が違いますよね。デンマークでも晴れたり曇ったり暑かったり。その1年間の中で、その四季の中で我々は暮らしているので、その1年間をリサーチするのがとても大切だと思います。やっぱり我々が一番最終的に基本的なものは水、空気、太陽、そういったものから、我々の人類共通の共有のものっていうのがマテリアルとして成り立っているので、そのマテリアルの動き方、そういったものを十分に調べて、それが一体の形になっているものが最もその場所に合ったものになると思っています。
So it's here that we see this connection of water. Actually, if we can go back to the previous slide, we can see the Miyajima Island and the shrine that is monumental, and the way that it actually addresses these moving forces of the water with the tide coming in and out. This is where Sambuichi-san was born, and the mystical quality of the island you can see on many different levels. As here the tide goes out, you see the monumentality of the shrine gate itself. But if we go to the next slide, we can see how the shrine structure as a platform really marks this tide as it comes in and out. And this notion that Sambuichi-san has stated is where you can really more clearly understand the movement of the water. So if this shrine weren't there, you wouldn't really be able to see the tide quite as easily, as he notes. And so next, please. We can see how the tide certainly is embraced and bringing in the notion of trying to work with nature rather than controlling nature, which is fundamental to all of this work. And really the principles that Asbi, I think, was talking about in the Edo period. So as we move to the next image, we see more broadly this region of the inland sea and the islands that really shape this particular sensitivity, with the clouds moving next to animate the experience with the landscape near and far next as the sun sets. And so the movement of the clouds, the winds, the water, and the movement of the earth are all in harmony in this sense. Next. But we see how the modern era has transformed this landscape, and one in which Sambuichi-san's work really takes inspiration to restore and sustain the landscape in light of, here in his perhaps most notable early project is the Idujima Art Museum, that is where the copper refinery was located starting in 1909 and fell into disuse in a mere 10 years as it was abandoned and not to be reborn until some 80 years later with this art project. And so as he looked to the fundamental aspects of restoring the landscape, he looked to ways in which the air flowed, not only in the refinery, but on the island. And so here, the whole island does become a museum that's living. Next, please. As we see here with the smokestack that becomes a monument here on the island, but one that functionally is how the air moved, and learning from this of how cool air could be drawn through and upwards is not only the logic of the original 1909 refinery, but how that could be the restoring of this island next, as we see with the water and air flowing through with glass heating the air and having the air flow through up the chimney. Next. And so it's with these principles of flowing air, of reusing, as we saw with Asbi, that we see this almost simple but fundamental way of designing, such as here we have the Miwa Gama Ceramic Studio that is made from reinforced concrete using these wooden formwork panels specially designed, but integrating those panels to actually form the actual doors of this structure, as we see next. Here, as these panels were used to form the concrete, they form the doors of the structure, such that next. It becomes a very sophisticated way of using them, not only on the exterior, but in the interior for the ceilings and the floors next, as we see in this whole process of reusing and creating next this sense of very tranquil space for the ceramics that's open to air, but also taking hints from these ceramics such that there's the form and formwork, or the mold and the object as an integral process. Next. So we can perhaps see these principles most clearly on the island of Naoshima, that is famous for being an art island. Many of you have heard or maybe visited it, that is also restoring a 400-year-old village that is on this island on many different ways. Ando's museum and art complex with accommodations really becomes a context, but next we can see many different types of installations to revitalize this area, whether it be Sejima's bubbles here, but next. That is one with depopulation has gone through many different challenges. And one, we can see the historic landscape in its reality as it has a small scale, but one that is the starting point for the work of Sambuichi, who spent many years, some 2.5 years, studying these principles of these villages to design, as we see next, and expose, such as here, the installation of this structure that we can see is the fundamental principles of construction. As Asli was talking about, he's the expert in this regard, but ways in which you can see these fundamental ways in which the movement of air, next, will pass through the traditional nagaya or longhouse and bring not only light, but cooling in the hot summer days. Next. That is elevated above the ground, but integrated also with water as it drains, but also reflects light, to really be this installation here of what a structure could be. Next. Which you can see here in this diagram of how the light and air and sun are all on display here to really show these fundamental principles of Edo architecture. That next. I invite you to see in its construction here in this video that really talks about the sustaining not only of architecture and the environment, but of the traditions of building. Next. But we can see perhaps most clearly these principles in the town hall of Naoshima, Naoshima Hall, that Sambuichi-san has designed here in this context. Next. In studying the village, as well as these forces of where the winds flow from north to south, or south to north, and this tradition of 400 years on these villages that continue through close observation. Next. And so here you can see this study of the flows of air, flows of water, how that's so important to understand in building in this context. Next. And as we see here, the roofs form the landscape of this village, and one that Sambuichi-san's work might almost disappear in how much it fits in this rhythm of the roofs. Next. As it's integral to this context. Next. So as we would approach, you can see this monumental hinoki roof, but one that's both artistic and sustainable in these materials that continue these traditions. Next. But is integrated into the land itself. And so here, while this becomes a structure that provides protection from rain, while allowing breezes to gently pass through, if you look at the top, you'll see how that light and air is actually animating the space inside. And so while it might be both sculptural and aesthetic in that sense, it is functional, how that fits into this landscape in which the angle of the roof matches the incline of the grass slope. Next. And so here you can see inside of this hall how it becomes this dramatic space animated by the light and air, where the community could come together for the performance of bunraku public plays. Next. And here, as you see, it really would be live with the air moving through. Next. As you see here in how that functions as a space beyond its aesthetic quality. Next. And so for the community in sustaining this context, we can see it fitting in, but sustaining not only these forces of air, light, water, but the forces of the community as the platform comes out as an outdoor stage, reflected in the water. Next. And extending out to the additional community building that's framed, but once again, with the air and light, learning from the lessons of the traditional farmhouses and structures. Next. To create this context for community activities. Next. As they gather. And here, as you would see, looking down, you would see the earthen floor that is actually from the Sanwa soil that uses bittern, a byproduct of the natural salt from the island, that can be seen itself as contemporary art, as light from above animates that surface with the air. Next. Such that light, air, art, materials all come together in daily life for the community that is integral. Next. And so once again, as it might seem very simple, it's very sophisticated in how it integrates in these traditions going back some 400 years, but giving hints to what the future might be for the next 400 years. Next. And so it is here that we understand Sambuichi-san's notion that architecture is a part of the earth, and how it's not necessarily about the gymnastics of materials, it's how it really does integrate with the materials of air, wind, and water. And we return to the fundamental philosophy that he stated: in an ideal architecture, if one looks at its form, the moving materials of the area or village, such as the wind, water, and sun, will become visible.
Thank you, Ken. I mean, for this poetic storytelling, it's like this idea of moving materials and working with nature, you transported us to the sites. And it's such a wonderful tool for reflection and for growth. And what we would love to do right now is to encourage audience to post questions in the chat for the reminder of the event. And there will be a lot more questions and we'll have the time to answer, but we'll do our best. And so both of you shared inspirational and informative presentations, and you authentically showcased the frontrunners in sustainable architecture and how modern Japan harnesses the traditional wisdom. So we'd love to learn more, right? And one of the questions maybe to kick us off in our discussion is that this following the specific exploration of the work of Hiroshi Nakamura and Hiroshi Sambuichi, what ideas do you have how to mobilize the community to for a greater social benefit?
Either any of us answer? Shall I go? Yeah. Yeah, I think the important thing is to bring people together physically, where they can find a way to comfortably and sort of feeling secure and sharing their ideas, so people can find out what other people think. This is often our situation, is we don't know really what other people think and what they actually want to do. And there's a lot of ways to do this. And interestingly, one of the key ways is to build a place like Nakamura has done, like Sambuichi has done, where people can do that, where they want to go. They'll enjoy being together. It will spark conversation, and they will want to return there again and again and have all of these important chance meetings. So I think, finding ways to bring people together physically to think about this stuff and talk about it is the most important thing.
Well, I think with the example of Sambuichi-san, in Naoshima, there are multiple communities. There's the community of Naoshima that has lived there for generations that are coming together that way. But the external community that comes to visit and discover these traditions and bring in money into the economy. But so how that interaction can work together in these settings directly of the local and global community through these lessons, through the interactions, through these spaces, I think becomes a key aspect of and key learning role of these projects.
Yeah, I think just to add, I think people in these smaller towns are often surprised that people from outside think they're so wonderful. And this validation is very important. So yes, you have something important here, valuable, we love it, and we want to help you preserve it. So this is an important role that people like us can play.
You know, as being past exchanges, we talked about a lot about global industries and how successful they have been at influencing aspirations and persuading us and society for the consumption. Can you elaborate a little more on that?
Yeah, this is one of the big issues is, you know, if we want to move towards a more sustainable society to solve these big problems, you know, we have to be able to do it in a way that people don't feel like they're sacrificing something, that they understand that actually living a wonderful life, a beautiful life, wonderful things, they're not going to stop having things and buying things, etc. But that this can be done in a circular way. And yet, yes, our aspirations and people's desires are so strongly influenced by advertising, by industry, by what's being made so far. The key point that I like to point out is that people vote with their pocketbook, and as people increasingly select and choose these kinds of items, these ways of living that are sustainable, that are circular, then industry will respond. This has always been the case. They see a market, they know that there's a business there for them to benefit from, and they will change. But I guess the key point is helping people understand that none of this means sacrificing. As we can see how beautiful these buildings are we're looking at, and products that are made in this way are incredibly beautiful as well. It really means life can get better.
Well, and I think as these lessons are really important for us in making us aware of things that are right in front of us, these cycles that actually are embedded in these communities, but the consciousness of it might not be as strong. And, you know, whether it be these traditions from the Edo period or these forces that you might not actually be as conscious of the air or the light until someone really points it out. And you sense it, but until you're conscious of it, you don't really grab onto that, which I think is basic, but yet so important.
You know, we all traveled, in our personal and professional lives and experienced examples of this communal living that are grounded in traditional wisdom of life and across different parts of the globe. In your view, what do you think differentiates the discovery, for example, in Edo style of life, as well as Kamikatsu experiments, from similar examples of elemental, natural-centric way of life that is observed elsewhere? Do you have some ideas or contemporary examples?
I guess I'll start on that. But yeah, the important thing to keep in mind is that all of these solutions and ways of living and ways of making and using things emerged from specific conditions. And, you know, Japan in the Edo period particularly was very isolated. They didn't have room to expand. They had this history of deforestation with this big problem they had to deal with. The culture was, you know, very literate society throughout, even in farmers and peasant communities. Very strong ethical, you know, attitudes towards nature and not wasting things. And governance was important. They exerted a very light hand on this stuff. They sort of let the business, you know, dominate, but and also allowed, you know, local domains to find specific solutions. So all of this stuff in the large population made innovation necessary, and the literacy and the publishing all made that very, very possible. So this was a very complete system. And what I saw in Kamikatsu was also a very complete system in a smaller scale, and beginning with a zero waste center. It was, you know, very evolved, and I think leaves lots of angles to grow. You know, it's not that this doesn't happen or can't happen elsewhere, but in Japan, there was this very specific sense that the problems are very far along, you know, experiencing problems before the West has, and finding solutions for some of them in a very, very good way. So architects, you know, often, you know, the big role for architects, I think, is to make things beautiful, right? And to show that, yeah, this thing is traditional, it comes from this, but look how cool it is, look how beautiful it is. It's something that we all want to be a part of, and to show our values and to show, you know, who we are. So I think there's a lot going on.
Absolutely. And Ken, you know, in terms of your thoughts, what role do design community like architects and landscape architects and urban designers have in this knowledge transfer? Like, and what are the possible applications of the modern life in support of a more robust kind of biodiversity?
Well, and when we look at the example of Sambuichi-san, you know, there's a sense of focus, not on concrete, steel, glass as materials to create an object, but what it can do in terms of, as we're discussing, these broader forces and cycles, and how that connects with our daily lives and the environment. And so the role of these designers of showing us the importance of these aspects that might be more ephemeral, but one that is actually very much about sustaining life. I think it becomes very important, you know, whether it be in the landscape or in the spaces of the interior that we inhabit.
Well, speaking of the special designers, I think it's a great honor to welcome our surprise guest, you know, who needs no special introduction. His work is synonymous with this rare balance of beauty and function and human experience, creating a symbiosis between built and natural environment. So we are incredibly fortunate to have Mr. Hiroshi Nakamura join us today. Mr. Nakamura, konnichiwa.
Konnichiwa.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Great to have you with us today, and morning and evening. And, you know, just to help us maybe summarize and bring this discussion, your prolific career actually transcends cultures, and it promotes peace. And I think of it like this notion of the inner peace. Would you please share some personal thoughts on today's conversation that we have, drawing on how the wisdom of the past still informs the way that contemporary architects seek to harmonize built and natural environment?
その今までディスカッションしてきた内容をちょっと付け加える形です。
と、今までの伝統を引き継いで、より自信を作り出すっていう。
そうですね。このサステナブルアーキテクチャっていうのは決して解雇主義的なものじゃなくて、懐かしい未来っていう言葉があるように、未来と過去両方がつながっているような、そんな建築だと思っています。
So, yes, thank you for the introduction for the project. And we learn a lot from the tradition in the past, and it's reflected in our design methodology. And as you can see, there is the past felt in the future. That's kind of a way of saying in Japanese, but that's what we're trying to achieve through the design process.
How do you personally mentor and encourage the designers in your inner circle to look to past for the guide and then also embrace that in their daily work?
普段の仕事の中でどうやって他の、方々メンバーとかにその過去から学ぶっていうそういうことを教えたり伝授してます。
やっぱり環境とつながっていったり、環境を大事にするっていうことの素晴らしさっていうのをシェアしながらやってます。
Yeah, I think the basic concept I try to convey is to nestle close to the environment, to respect the environment. I think that's the baseline that we always start the conversation from.
That's great. And I know Ken and Asby had an opportunity just recently to meet in Japan. And I'm sure that they have lots of questions they were exploring, and I'm going to open it up for them for any final thoughts and comments and exchange with you.
And you have a question? If not,
I mean, I just want to add this kind of notion of learning from tradition in looking to the future, how we connect. I'm inspired by Sambuichi-san's notion of looking back some 400 years to look forward the next 400 years. It's in a much longer span that we can start to see how we can really sustain our existence. But it's important to look at the moment, but also step back, and whether it be Edo or even before Edo, or what things will be in the 22nd century becomes, I think, important for us to step back and think about.
Asby, here's maybe one for you from our audience, and that is the importance of and significance of the concept of wabi-sabi in the circular economy as material is used over time as it ages.
There's so much interest in this concept of wabi-sabi. It's been very much popularized. And I think for me, one of the key aspects is it implies aging, and it implies that things have been used for a long time and have been valued. They take on a patina, they have a story to convey. So I don't know to what degree architects we're looking at today have that in the forefront of their mind, but I think in terms of these principles from Edo period, of course, this was a key value. It was a key aesthetic value, and I think even today it's very, very important. And hopefully, the things we use will ultimately be in use long enough and treasured enough to achieve those qualities.
Any additional thoughts from Japan and from Mr. Nakamura?
I have a question for Nakamura-san.
Please.
And in English. Can you tell us a little bit about how the idea for the Zero Waste Center started? Because I think it says something very important about roles of architects for making things happen.
ゼロウェイストのアイデアが始まったか教えてください。
ゼロウェイストのアイデア、ゼロウェイストセンター。もともと別の用事でこの町に行った時にちっちゃなボロボロの小屋でこの分別をやってたんですけど、 それを見て、ものすごくこれは世界にもう伝えるべき新しい価値を持っていると感動しまして、その町長に直接行きまして、これを環境型の複合施設として、例えばホテルだったり、例えばコミュニティ施設だったり、そういうものと一体化した、施設としてリニューアルすべきだというふうに自ら提案しました。
So, a few years before the project started, I was actually in Kamikatsu for different occasion, and that's when I learned about the old zero waste center, which was just small shack, but they were doing it so perfectly, and he was really moved by the whole system, and he thought it was worthy of showing that to the world. So I personally went to go talk to the head of the town at Kamikatsu and proposed renewing Zero Waste Center with integration of hotel and incubation center and community center where the community can come together as well. That's where it started.
Yeah, to me, that's just remarkable that it was Nakamura-san's idea. And earlier, Carol, we were wondering what can architecture designers do to help positive things happen? And one is to come up with ideas like this. And it is a wonderful example of the architect being the driver and the inspiration for this to happen.
Absolutely, to be the light and to be the center of the hope. That summarizes really well, Asbi. And I want to thank you and Ken, and thank you, Mr. Nakamura. You offered us both provoking but also attainable narrative of ideas. And I think that that's what is the powerful message of the meeting today, how to become one with Earth cycle, both respecting the environment and inhabiting Earth intelligently and justly. And I would also like a special thanks to Japan Society and Japan Institute of Portland Japanese Garden and partners for organizing this Living Tradition series and designed to examine the iconic facets of the Japanese culture, both from ancient roots to modern day. Special gratitude goes to all of you who join us, our audience. We know you could have been anywhere this evening or today for this last hour, but you chose to spend it with us. And so please let us know your thoughts via survey. It's posted in a link in a chat. We encourage you to join us. And then please mark your calendars for 1/31, January 31st, for the Japanese animation in the global era. Thank you all, and please go out into the world living sustainably. ありがとうございます。
Thank you. ありがとう。